I never thought I would spend my life on a planet made of ice and silence. But that is where I ended up, stationed at Outpost Ren, the smallest human base in the whole colony network, sitting at the edge of a frozen valley the locals called the Silver Reach. The locals were not human. They were the Vithari, a species of great-winged creatures that the first explorers had nicknamed dragons, because of their long necks, sharp claws, and scales that shimmered like metal under the pale sun. They were taller than any human, strong enough to crush stone with a single strike, and old enough that some of their elders remembered a time before humans had ever left their home planet. For 3 years I lived among them as a low-level liaison. My job was simple on paper: observe, translate when I could, keep peace, and report back to the humans stationed further south. In truth, my job felt more like waiting. The Vithari did not trust humans. They were polite, in their own distant way, but their eyes always carried a kind of doubt, as if they were still deciding whether we were worth the trouble of remembering. I could not blame them. To the Vithari, humans were small, soft, and short-lived. We froze easily. We tired easily. We could not fly, could not breathe fire, could not survive a night on the open ice without dying quietly in our sleep. They saw us the way someone might see a bird with a broken wing, pitiful, but not truly capable of much. I had grown used to that look. I told myself it did not bother me. But some nights, alone in my small metal room at the edge of their territory, I wondered if I would ever be more to them than a strange guest who happened to still be alive. That all changed the night the storm came. It began without warning, the way the worst storms on that planet always did. One moment the sky was clear and sharp with cold stars. The next, the wind rose into a scream, and snow fell so thick that my own hand disappeared in front of my face. The Vithari called it the long white breath, a storm so fierce that even their strongest hunters stayed inside their dens and waited it out. I was inside my shelter when I heard the alarm horn sound from the nesting cliffs. 3 short blasts followed by one long, mournful note. I had heard that horn only once before, during a training drill. It meant only one thing among the Vithari: danger to the young. I threw on my thermal coat and ran outside before I could think twice. The wind hit me like a wall, but I pushed forward, following the horn toward the nesting cliffs where the hatchlings were kept safe in warm stone hollows, guarded day and night by at least 2 adults. When I arrived, I found chaos. A section of the cliff had given way under the weight of snow and ice, opening a crack that swallowed part of the nesting ledge. Below it, I could hear the storm howling into a canyon that led out onto the open ice fields, a place so exposed that nothing could survive there for long. The adult Vithari were gathered at the broken edge, roaring into the wind, clawing uselessly at fallen rock. I understood then what had happened. The hatchlings, too young to fly, too small to fight the wind, had been swept down into that canyon when the ledge collapsed. I found Threska first, the pack's lead mother, a massive dragon whose scales were the color of deep blue ice. She was always calm, always steady, the kind of creature who seemed like she had never known fear. But that night, her eyes were wide and wild, and her voice, when she spoke to me in the broken trade language we shared, cracked with something I had never heard from her before. "They are gone," she said. "Down. The wind took them down. We cannot fly in this, we cannot see." I looked past her, down into the canyon. The wind was a solid wall of white. Even the strongest flyers among the Vithari would be smashed against the rocks if they tried to enter that storm. Their wings, built for open sky and clear air, were useless in a blizzard this thick. It was, I realized with a strange twist in my chest, one of the very few things a Vithari could not do that a human, somehow, still might. "How many hatchlings?" I asked. 4, Threska said. 4, out there, alone. I did not decide to go. Not really. It was more like my body decided before my mind caught up, the way you pull your hand back from a flame before you even feel the heat. I checked the straps on my thermal coat, pulled my hood tight, and clipped a small headlamp and a beacon device to my chest. "You cannot," Threska said, stepping in front of me, her huge body blocking the canyon entrance. "You will die." "Maybe," I said, "but I might not, and you cannot go at all." She stared at me for a long moment. I think, looking back, that was the moment something shifted between our people, though neither of us understood it yet. She stepped aside. I ran into the storm. The wind was worse than anything I had trained for. It cut through even my thermal coat, biting at every inch of exposed skin. Snow slammed into my face so hard I had to turn my head sideways just to breathe. I switched on my headlamp, but the light only bounced back at me, swallowed by the white. I moved by feel more than sight. keeping one gloved hand against the canyon wall to guide me downward. My boots sank deep into fresh snow with every step, and more than once I nearly lost my footing on hidden ice beneath. I did not let myself think about how easy it would be to fall, or how far the drop beside me went. I thought only about the hatchlings, small and cold and alone somewhere below. I called out as I walked, my voice swallowed almost instantly by the wind. I did not expect them to answer. Hatchlings that young barely had a voice at all, more chirp than roar. But I called anyway, because staying silent felt like giving up, and I was not ready to give up. The canyon narrowed as I went deeper, the wind funneling through it with even greater force. My legs burned with the effort of pushing through snow that reached my knees in places. My fingers, even inside thick gloves, had gone numb. I checked my beacon device, watching the small light blink steadily, marking my path so I could find my way back, if there was a way back. Then I saw it, a shape, dark against the white, tucked into a narrow crack in the canyon wall. I half ran, half stumbled toward it, dropping to my knees in the snow. There, huddled together in a space barely large enough to hold them, were 3 hatchlings, their scales dull with cold, their small chests rising and falling in shallow, frightened breaths. They looked up at me with wide, glassy eyes, too exhausted even to make a sound. "I've got you," I said, though I doubted they understood the words. Maybe they understood the tone. I hoped they did. I checked quickly for injuries, running my hands gently over each small body. They were freezing, but breathing. No obvious wounds. 3. Threska had said 4. I forced myself to keep looking, even as the cold crept deeper into my own body, even as my breath came out in ragged white clouds. I called out again, listening as hard as I could between gusts of wind. Then I heard it. A faint chirp, thin and weak, coming from further down the canyon. I gathered the 3 hatchlings as gently as I could, tucking them inside my coat against my chest, zipping it as far as it would go while still leaving room for them to breathe. Their cold little bodies pressed against mine, and despite everything, despite the storm and the fear and the pain in my hands, I felt something steady settle in my chest. I was not going to leave any of them behind. I pushed forward, following the sound of that weak chirp, my steps slower now under the added weight, my body shaking from the cold and the effort. The wind seemed to fight me harder with every step, as if it did not want me to reach the last hatchling at all. I found it wedged between 2 rocks, smaller than the others, its wings still too soft and new to be any use against the storm. It was shivering so hard I could see it even through the snow. I reached in carefully and pulled it free, cradling it against my chest with the others, feeling its tiny heartbeat flutter against my hand. "Okay," I whispered, more to myself than to the hatchling. "Okay, now we go back." The walk back was harder than the walk down. Gravity was against me now, and the extra weight of 4 small bodies pulled at my already exhausted arms and legs. My beacon light guided me back through the canyon, but even with it, the wind seemed determined to push me off course, to bury my tracks before I could follow them. I do not remember all of that climb clearly. I remember the burning cold in my lungs with every breath. I remember my legs shaking with each step, threatening to give out beneath me. I remember talking to the hatchlings, quiet nonsense words, just to keep myself moving. Just to keep my mind from slipping into the kind of gray fog that cold brings before it takes everything else. I thought about home, oddly enough, somewhere in the middle of that climb. I thought about why I had come to this frozen, distant place at all, why I had left everything familiar behind to live among creatures who did not trust me, who did not think I belonged. I thought that maybe this was why. Not for glory, not for recognition, but for moments like this, when it mattered more to keep moving than to stop. My legs gave out once, about halfway up the canyon. I fell hard into the snow, the hatchlings shifting against my chest, one of them letting out a small, frightened chirp. That sound was what got me back on my feet. I could not stay down, not with them depending on me. I do not know how long it took to climb back out of that canyon. It felt like hours, though later I learned it had been less than that, though not by much. What I do remember clearly is the moment the wind began to ease, just slightly, and I saw a dim shape ahead of me through the snow, tall and broad, waiting at the canyon entrance. Threska had not moved from that spot the entire time. She saw me first as a shadow, stumbling and slow, barely able to stand. Then she saw the shape of small heads poking out from the top of my coat, and I heard a sound from her that I had never heard a Vithari make before, something between a roar and a cry, loud enough to cut through even the dying wind. The other adults came rushing then, gathering around me in a wide circle, their huge bodies blocking what remained of the wind. I sank to my knees in the snow, my strength finally gone, and carefully, with hands that shook from cold and exhaustion both, I unzipped my coat and lifted the hatchlings out, one by one, placing them into the waiting arms of their parents. Threska took the smallest one first, curling her long neck around it, pressing her scaled head gently against its tiny body. The sound she made then was soft, almost human in its rawness, a kind of relief that needed no translation. I do not remember much after that. I remember the cold finally winning, my vision going dark at the edges, my body folding sideways into the snow. I remember, just before everything faded, feeling something large and warm curl around me, blocking the last of the wind, holding me the way Threska had just held her hatchling. When I woke, I was inside one of the nesting dens, wrapped in thick furs, a fire of some kind burning nearby, throwing warm orange light across stone walls. My body ached everywhere, my fingers and toes tingling painfully as feeling slowly returned to them. But I was warm. I was alive. Threska was there when I opened my eyes, curled nearby, watching me with an expression I had never seen on her before. Not doubt, not distance, something closer to wonder. "You should not have survived that," she said quietly. "I know," I admitted, my voice rough and cracked. "Why did you go?" she asked. "We did not ask this of you. We did not expect it." I thought about how to answer that, my mind still slow and foggy from exhaustion. "Because I could," I said finally, "because no one else could, and I was not going to just stand there and watch." She was quiet for a long moment, her large eyes studying me in a way that felt different from before, less like studying a strange creature and more like seeing someone clearly for the first time. "We believed your people were fragile," she said, "weak, not suited for this world. We were not wrong, in body. You are fragile. You nearly died tonight. But?" I asked, sensing there was more. "But fragile is not the same as small," she said. "Tonight, you were larger than any of us, though your body is smaller than a single one of my claws." I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing, letting the warmth of the den and the quiet rumble of her voice settle over me. Over the following days, as my body healed, something had changed in how the pack treated me. It was not dramatic, not sudden in any grand way. It was small things, the way the younger Vithari, hatchlings barely older than the ones I had carried, would come close to watch me, no longer afraid, sometimes even letting out small chirps of greeting when I passed. The way the adults who had once kept a careful, polite distance now spoke to me more freely, asking questions about my life, my world, my reasons for coming to theirs. Threska visited often, sometimes just to sit with me in silence, other times to talk. She told me one evening about the history of her people, about storms like the long white breath that had taken hatchlings in the past, long before I had ever arrived, storms that no one had ever survived walking into. "You are the first," she said. "The first to walk into that storm and walk back out, carrying life instead of leaving it behind." "I got lucky," I said, though even as I said it, I did not fully believe it. "Luck does not carry 4 hatchlings up a canyon in a blizzard," she said. "Choice does that. Will does that." I stayed at Outpost Ren for 2 more years after that night, and in that time, my place among the Vithari changed entirely. I was no longer simply tolerated, no longer just a strange guest they were unsure what to do with. I was given a name in their own language, something that, when translated as closely as I could manage, meant roughly, "the one who walks where wings cannot fly." It was not a grand title. It did not come with parades or ceremonies, not in the way humans might expect. It came instead in small, quiet ways, in the trust I saw building in their eyes, in the way hatchlings would run to greet me without fear, in the way Threska, and later other pack leaders, began to ask my opinion on matters that concerned both our peoples. I often thought back to that night, to the cold and the fear and the desperate push through snow and wind. I thought about how easily it could have ended differently, how many ways that storm could have taken me instead of letting me carry those hatchlings home. I did not consider myself brave. Not exactly. I had been terrified the entire time, but I had learned something that night that I do not think I ever fully understood before. Strength is not always about size, or claws, or wings, or fire. Sometimes it is simply about refusing to stop, refusing to leave someone behind, even when every reasonable part of you says it might be the last thing you ever do. The Vithari had once seen humans as small, fragile things, barely able to survive their world. In many ways, they were right. We did not have their strength, their size, their ability to fly through open skies or breathe fire against the cold. But that night in the storm, none of that had mattered. What mattered was that someone had been willing to walk into danger for creatures not their own, simply because it was the right thing to do. I think that is what changed things between our peoples more than any treaty or agreement ever could have. Not power, not strength, just the simple, stubborn refusal to leave 4 small, frightened lives out in the cold. Years later, long after I had returned to human space, I received word that the pack at Outpost Ren still told the story of that night to their hatchlings, a story about a small, soft creature who walked into a storm no dragon could fly through, and came back carrying life in their arms. I do not know if I will ever return to that frozen valley, to that world of ice and silence, but I know that somewhere out there, among creatures who once thought my kind too fragile to matter, there is a pack of dragons who remember a night when a human proved that fragile does not mean small, and small does not mean weak. And sometimes, when the wind picks up on quiet nights here on my homeworld, I still think about that storm, about the cold, about the small, frightened chirps of hatchlings pressed against my chest, and about the warmth that followed once we were finally, safely, home. That night taught me something I have carried with me ever since. It does not matter how big you are, or how strong, or how well suited you might seem for the challenges in front of you. What matters is whether you are willing to walk forward anyway, into the storm, for someone who needs you. I was just one small, ordinary person, but that night, for 4 small lives lost in the snow, I was enough. And in the end, I think that is the truest kind of strength there is.